For me, I always look at it as what is the absolute worst that can happen. I have a degree. I can probably get a job fairly quickly if this doesn't work out. So, am I really taking that big of a chance by doing this? So, I think people really have to look at what is the absolute worst case scenario.
Welcome to Multifamily Insights. I'm your host, John Casman, and I want to thank you for joining us for another great episode. Listen, if you are enjoying this show, you're an avid listener, I need you to do me a quick little favor and leave us a rating and review. It helps us learn more about what you love about the show, but also gives us some honest feedback to help us make the show work harder for your investing goals. And listen, if this is your first time listening, or for some reason you haven't done it yet, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. Now, we've got a great show today. We're going to be talking to Anthony Winston III. Hey, Multifamily Insights listeners, if you're looking to invest beyond multifamily, make sure you check out the Invest Beyond Multifamily Conference this fall, Wednesday, October 11th through Friday, October 13th, here in Cincinnati, Ohio. Listen, you're going to learn how to invest in non-residential commercial real estate and master the art of scaling your commercial real estate business. Now, this event is being hosted by Ash Patel, guest on the show, and he's featuring great speakers such as Nate Barger and Joe Fairless. If you want to learn how to invest beyond just multifamily, be sure to check out this event October 11th through the 13th. All you have to do is go to investbeyondmultifamily.com/fall-conference. Again, that's investbeyondmultifamily.com/fall-conference. Anthony Winston III has an engineering background. He's a licensed electrical engineer originally from Chicago, and he obtained his BS in electrical engineering with emphasis in power transmission and distribution from Arizona State University. Now, he has started the Winston Engineering Inc., and in 2015, he provided only electrical engineering for residential and commercial buildings. But within 1 year, his team grew, and now he offers full MEP services. Let's welcome to the show Anthony Winston III.
Thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely. Hey, Anthony, I went over your bio at a very high level. Why don't you take 2 minutes and fill in some of those gaps?
Yeah. So, um, eventually, from moving around, left Chicago as a teenager, uh, found my way in California. I went to high school, and then eventually made my way to Arizona State University. And I knew I wanted to go into engineering, but I didn't really understand that path until one of my professors kind of pulled me by the coattails. And he said, I think you should go into power because a lot of people were retiring. And in the electrical engineering field, a lot of people kind of go for the sexy fields like, NASA or, missile and space systems, things like that. So I thought I'd be working for a utility, ended up working for a government contracting organization where I was a test engineer for missile and radar systems. And after a while of doing that, I decided it really wasn't for me, especially because of the missile component. Like these could really hurt somebody. So that was problematic. And so I worked for another government contracting firm. And then once I got my PE license, which is my professional engineering license, some years later, I took a pay cut and started working for an electrical contractor. And I really wanted to get my feet wet and understand the construction world. And once I got my hands on drawings, I realized these are a lot simpler than missile and radar systems. And so while commuting, a couple hours on the train back and forth, I Googled how do you start a business? And that's really where Winston Engineering came from. And I was doing both at the same time. And one day I signed a large enough contract where I was able to walk away, and it's been great ever since. I haven't looked back. So that's been since 2015, and our team has steadily grown. We're a virtual company, so we've never had a physical office, even before it became cool to work remotely due to COVID. So we're spread across 4 different time zones. We work in U.S. as well as Canada. A large portion of our work is in California because that's where we started, and that's where the company is still registered. But we work across the entire US from west to east coast. In terms of our project types, we do anything on the residential side, or start with commercial. On the commercial side, from small coffee shops up to, medical facilities and things like that. But on the residential side, we do anything from small ADUs, which we're doing a lot of those now, custom houses, and now we're doing a lot of multifamily mixed use, affordable housing, transitional housing, things like that. So that's what really sparked my interest about, your podcast is that, we've been in a housing crisis, but now it seems like everybody's ringing the bell, and those projects are starting to get a little bit accelerated.
Yeah, Anthony, hey, great to hear about your background. Just to recap a little bit, born and raised in Chicago, moved to California, went to school at Arizona State, and decided to go into engineering, focus on power, initially focusing on missiles and radars, which sounds very intriguing. So we'll have to come back to that real quick. But really, ultimately, you decided to focus on electrical engineering, made the commute, and then started building your own company along that pathway. Today, you focus on kind of new developments from coffee shops to multifamily ADUs and all sorts of other commercial and residential projects. Just to go back to that time, right? You talked about the missiles and radars, and that feels like it could be both intriguing as well as maybe kind of intense, right? Because one mistake there is not the same as a mistake on something maybe a little less critical. But what was that like, working on missiles and radars? I mean, was that for NASA, or was that for private companies? Like, what was
Uh,
that?
it was actually a public company called Raytheon, and I'll give you a quick story. Once I was at an Army depot, and they couldn't figure out some equipment, and we had to go down there and do some testing. And I'm sitting there with one of the techs, and I see this big, what looks like a big ball with wire sticking out of it. And I say, "Hey, what's this?" And I like almost physically touch it. He said, "Don't touch that. That's a warhead. Well, you'll blow us all up." So it was interesting and scary all at the same time, being able to see kind of emerging technologies. But again, it didn't sit right with me working with weapons of destruction like that.
Yeah, man. Yeah. Well, you decided to use those talents for good, and focus
Yeah.
on more electrical engineering and building constructions. What was it about, that commute? You talked about getting into electrical engineering, working for his contractor, but really having this long commute. And during that commute, you had the chance to really build out your company. So take us back to that time.
Yeah, so I've always known that I want to kind of start my own company, but it wasn't until that first job out of college where I was kind of in this big cubicle farm, and they sent the financial reporting of how much the company made. They made a couple $1 billion or whatever it is. And I kind of stood up and looked around and was like, I may have played a small part, but I played a part in doing that, right? Why can't I build something for myself and my family? And I didn't necessarily know how I was going to do it. But once I got my license, my PE license, which allows me to consult, right? Because when drawings comes across my desk, when we create them, I have to stamp them, right? That lets the jurisdiction as well as the client know that these are correct and we're not going to kill anybody. That's the goal, right? Um, it's all about public safety first. And once I realized I could consult, I'm like, wait a minute, I could do this for myself. I had zero background or taken any courses in business development. But with our vast internet resources, I figured it out. I figured if I could renovate an entire house using YouTube, I could probably start a company. And it grew well beyond what I thought it could. And instead of just sitting on that train on social media, I was cold calling clients, even on the commute driving, right? Because it was an hour and something on the train, another hour driving. I would say, "Hey Google, dial," and say the numbers, and I would just do that over and over and over again. And to this day, I still work with some of those first clients that I called.
Yeah, I think there's a couple insights there. So first one is, and it's interesting because I got similar, not feedback, but that similar aha from one of my mentors when I was in advertising. But you talked about working in your cubicle, looking at the numbers, right? Quarterly reports or the annual earnings report, and you see the billions of dollars in revenue that has been generated, and you recognize that, hey, maybe I'm not the bulk of this, but I played a role, right? And why can't I do this for myself? And when I was at an advertising agency, I went to work for a smaller shop, and I asked the CEO, and he was an entrepreneur. He launched a company. He knew very well that I wanted to be an entrepreneur as well, and that's part of why I decided to work at this smaller shop. And I asked him at what point did he know that he wanted to leave and go into his own? And he said the same thing. He said he got too close to the numbers. And once he started paying attention to those numbers, and he realized, wait a minute, we're bringing in X amount of dollars, we're billing out this amount. If I can go and get one or two clients, I can build this myself, right? And I think it's really important for people just to understand that, you have to start with the belief that you can do it, that you can go out there and build this company if you want to be an entrepreneur, right? But it starts by getting close enough to the numbers to understand what it is you're looking at, how the revenue is generated, what expenses do you have. And then you can go out and learn more about the nuances of launching your own business. But once you get close to it, you realize it is just numbers, right? It's just like buying a property. It's just like anything else, right? It's a business, and business comes down to income minus expenses. So
Yeah.
once you got close to that, you kind of educated yourself on what it meant to be a consultant, getting your license, and you were able to grow that business. Can you talk to us about how you were finding these clients early on? Because you talked about that wasn't really your background,
Yeah.
but you were finding clients. So how were you doing that?
Uh, it was tough, to be honest with you, because, well, let me retract that. It was relatively easy to find the clients. The issue was, you say getting close to the numbers. That was a totally different industry, right? So I had never worked in this industry at all. Most people, when they decide to step out on their own, they have already worked into it and saw kind of behind the scenes. Well, I didn't. I didn't even know how to price. And so trying to figure that out, and I didn't know any other engineers who were in my space who were doing their own thing. And so I had to figure that piece of it. And when I say figure it out, I would price something and someone would agree to it immediately. And then I'm thinking, maybe I should have charged more. Or I've literally had people laugh and say, I'm not paying that. So you try to figure out what the market will bear. And then the other piece of it is, and I think a lot of aspiring entrepreneurs face this, is that fear. What happens if it fails? For me, I always look at it as, what is the absolute worst that can happen? I have a degree. I can probably get a job fairly quickly if this doesn't work out. So am I really taking that big of a chance by doing this? So I think people really have to look at what is the absolute worst case scenario.
I love that because when you talk about looking at the worst case scenario, if you're especially when you're young, right? It's much easier when you don't have a whole lot of responsibilities and a note to pay and children depending on you. But if you don't have those responsibilities, if the worst case is your current situation, right? Oh, I guess I gotta go back and get a job. You're in a position to take those risks, right? So I
Yeah.
think it's a great way to think about it, so that you can push yourself and maybe take on challenges that may feel more daunting a little bit later in life. If you could go back to either yourself at that time or for that entrepreneur who's aspiring now, but trying to figure out that pricing strategy, right? It's like, okay, I have some folks that I can reach out to, but I don't know what to charge. What resources or recommendations would you give to yourself or someone else in that position?
So I think what I should have done is reached out to a lot more architects, developers, folks who actually, are kind of on the front end of this, who are pricing in our costs as MEP engineers, and say, hey, well, what percentage is typically allocated to the engineers, which I found out much later in my career. I probably would have started there. I mean, sometimes you can do some of your own market research and call up some engineering firm to say, hey, how much would you price XYZ project? Because there is no venue of pricing. So everybody's going to be drastically different, especially if it's a much larger firm or a small mom and pop, like, what I would consider us relatively small. Because especially with us being virtual, we don't have that huge overhead. So we don't have to charge a crazy amount.
Yeah, I think it's good feedback for anyone, right? Is like start with the potential clients who's going to bake you in, ask what they pay, what have they paid. Start maybe even looking at competitors, right? If you have a competitor who is really a good comp for what you do, and try to just get a sense of it. And that's true for consulting. That's true for especially anything where it's not like you can just go on what's the Glassdoor or something like that, right? Just look up salaries, right? When you're running a business, sometimes it is difficult to figure out what you should be charging. So, those are some really good tips to help you figure out how to figure out your pricing. Let's talk a little bit more about Winston Engineering, right? So you launched this company, you're starting to help and work on different projects. One, what's an ideal project? I know you mentioned everything from small coffee shops to ADUs and multifamily, but like walk us through kind of a typical project.
So let's say we'll dive into multifamily. The best projects are those that have been fully thought through with an architect beforehand. What happens quite a bit is that you haven't fully thought out what you want to do with the architect and how you, whether it's a new build or renovation. And then you come to us as the engineers, and we're going to price this project based on what the architect has, right? You have to start with the architect to draw up the floor plans, and then there's what I call a whole bunch of oh by the ways, right? That's oh by the way, I would like to have this. Oh by the way, I think we want solar. Oh by the way, right? And that it just keeps coming up, and we're hitting them with a bunch of change orders, which is going to hurt your budget significantly. So if you're coming in with a solid architectural plan with a solid bill of materials, right? You need to know what type of lights fixtures that you want to use, what type of appliances that you want to use, because you have a direct line to your supplier, hopefully, on getting those products, so you can get the best pricing. So you tell me, I want these, 6-inch can lights at, I don't know, 12 watts. Now we know exactly what we need to do. Whereas if you constantly changing your lighting fixtures, now we're updating our calcs when it comes to electrical. And then even let's say it's a new build, or actually even in a renovation, you want to update the HVAC equipment, and let's say you want to run ducted heat pumps. Well, where are those ducts going to go? If you haven't thought that through with your architect and built in the appropriate chases, right? These are the empty voids in the walls or the ceilings where you can run your duct. Now we have a problem, because now we're getting close, finishing up design. And then if you get as far as contractors, then you really got a problem, because, right, the project gets more expensive the further along you get.
Yeah, walk us through what is kind of the ideal process from your standpoint, right? So it's interesting because we always talk to investors and maybe contractors, but for you, kind of on the engineering, you're kind of in the middle, right? You're not necessarily at the very, very beginning, but you're not at the end either. So from your viewpoint, what should that process look like? 'Cause I think most investors, you find either whether it be a piece of land and you say, okay, great, let's build 20 units here, and you get someone to draw that up and you start running. Or if you buy a home or a property that you want to renovate, you kind of get into that, and maybe you bring in an architect, maybe they don't bring in an architect. So what is that like? If you could tell investors, hey, here's what it should look like, what would that be?
In a perfect world, it's good to have your architect that you work with a lot, and your MEP engineers, and your structural. We don't do structural, but having a structural engineer, and to start the schematic design process together. So typically schematic design is kind of a rough sketch of what it is that you want to do. That way us as engineers can say, oh, you got your electrical room here. How about you move it there, right? Um, you have your heat pumps, your vents going here. Well, you might get better airflow there. That way we have a lot more input very early on, because it's easy to erase and redraw, right? As opposed to getting further down the line and you're in plan check, then it could become expensive and a long process. So having us all together in the very beginning, and then once you get out of schematic design, then you start. Well, actually, I would even go further before that, design development, and then schematic design, which is you start getting more into the construction docs, getting them ready, and then you move into construction docs, which are really specific. All the notes, all the calculations are completely done. So by the time you get to your CDs, you're ready to submit. And if you have a contractor on board already, great. But if not, then you have a complete package that you can go to a general contractor, say, here's my architectural, my MEP, and my structural drawings. Price this contractor A, B, and C, and then you pick who you vibe with, who has good pricing, who you know is somebody you can actually work with long term, because a contractor can have the greatest prices, but they could be jerks to work with. So
Yeah. I think it's really helpful for people to get a better sense, particularly on like larger constructions or more involved projects, because I know when I was flipping houses, which was a very short-lived time frame, we relied heavily on a contractor, right? We partnered with the general contractor. We would bring in the architect. That architect worked with the contractor, and then we, kind of crossed our fingers and hoped for the most. We stayed on top of it, but we didn't know the technical stuff as much, so we really had to rely on that contractor. We didn't work with, someone like yourself with that MEP background. I know we said MEP a couple times. That may be a new term for some folks. Can you just explain exactly what that is?
yeah, so that's the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing. And mechanical is your referred to your HVAC, so your heating, ventilation, and air conditioning.
Yeah, so having that person who really understands how all that flows together is critical. Because even from a construction standpoint, you'll hear nightmare stories of people who, maybe they start installing stuff in the wrong order, and the electrical guys come in, the plumbers come in, and then the carpenters end up, busting holes in some of the plumbing
Mhm.
pipes because they didn't know the pipes were there. So you've got to definitely have everyone kind of working together if you want to avoid some of those issues. What are some other common mistakes you see from an MEP standpoint?
You mean from incorrect drawings, or you mean of how developers or folks, they're the property owners interact?
Developers, investors, and property owners, what are some of the mistakes you see them making when it comes to that side of the business?
Honestly, it's not knowing what you want ahead of time. Um, it's setting unrealistic timelines, because quite often, this is any consultant, a client thinks you're only working on their project, right? So if in our contracts, we have a client to provide section, especially if this is an existing building, we want the MEP as built. So as built are exactly what that sounds like. It's what the building is at its current state. And sometimes that's not always possible. So sometimes you have to have someone go out and do a site visit. And don't cheap out on the site visit. Have your consultants go out there to map out um, all of your systems. But it's super important that you get your engineers and your architect all the submittals that they require as quickly as possible, because we have a block of time to work on your project. And once we get out of that block of time, now we're trying to squeeze you in with our other projects. So we've had clients who we've asked for stuff a month ago, and then they come back and expect you to still stick with the same timeline. Like you got to be you got to be a bit more flexible on that, but make just being on point with that. And I can't expect every developer to know what it means when I say we need the utility contributing fault current. They look at you like, what are you talking about? And that's something that's really important, right? Because the transformer that the utility has, that's going to install if you need a power upgrade, that contributes a certain amount of fault current. And that's going to dictate the size of your panel that we need to get. And so that's extremely important because we have to run fault calculations. But I think it's important that when we ask for those things, raise your hand and say, I don't understand. Can you help me with this? As opposed to letting it slip.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing, right? Especially for a new developer, because people, I come across people all the time who, again, maybe they found a piece of land or there's a project they want to do, but it's their first development and they just don't know what they don't know. What feedback and advice would you give that first time developer so they don't run into some of the issues you just talked about?
Yeah, especially if your renovation is going to require a power upgrade, or if it's a completely new build, right? So you need to bring in new power. With all electric being the big thing, right? Especially people want EV chargers. They want induction cooktops. They want heat pumps. We've worked in jurisdictions where you're not allowed to use natural gas, so everything has to be all electric. Make sure that you're getting that you are getting in contact with the local utility immediately, and I would even say before you even purchase the property, because there are a few things that could affect this project. One is budget, because depending on where they have to bring the power in from, that could affect your ROI. Also, timelines. I've heard horror stories of 18-month lead time
Oh, wow.
just to get you power. So it's extremely important to go to the local utility and get a rep assigned to your project. And a lot of times, what they'll tell you is, "We need drawing." And so now you need to bring in the engineer up front to start doing the preliminary load calculations, which means you need to know what type of appliances and all lighting and all those good things, so that we can nail down what your power requirements are. But that is the biggest one, is utility lead times.
I think it's very helpful because that's something that most people probably think about after they've closed on a project, and not while they're still going through due diligence and kind of confirming their timelines or confirming some of their expectations. So really good insight right there on just talking to those utility companies, getting that rep involved and understanding what do they require so you can plan that into your timeline. Talk to us about a project you love, favorite project you've done so far and maybe something that's in the pipeline.
In terms of favorite projects, going back to what we were talking about off air, like I love projects that have a community service component to it. Things that are going to make a positive impact on the people who are living in the area. And that's whether that's transitional housing for maybe folks who are being released from prison, whether it's homeless shelter, um, even mental health care facilities. But some of my favorite projects have been, I'll name three really quickly. One, close to LAX, there was an old hotel that we worked on that was being converted over to homeless housing. Um, Another one was a teen, they took this huge home, I would even call it a mansion, and converted it over to a teen mental health care facility to help at-risk youth. And then we've also done projects where we've done a big group of tiny homes for homeless shelters. So those are the things that we really love. Like our motto is we engineer the future for the betterment of our society and buildings. And we put society first on purpose, right? Because again, we want to make a really good impact on the people who live there.
Where do you think that passion or interest in serving the community came from for you?
Um, I'm originally from South Side Chicago, and I've seen a lot of bad housing. I've gone to kids who I went to school with who lived in the projects, right? I've been to the projects, and to see some of the conditions that they live in, and 9 times out of 10 is not necessarily their fault, but to see the conditions that the landlords allow it to be in, like I don't, that's just not cool. And that's even within our design, that's in the back of my mind. A lot of low income housing, you'll have a lot of kids who have asthma. And it's something that I just learned is that when you cook with gas, a lot of those gases, they settle, that when they burn, they settle on the ground, which is close to children. And so when you have improper ventilation to remove those, that does not remove those gases, now you're impacting, the little one who now has to deal with asthma for the rest of their lives. Um, and then that passion grew even further when I got to college. I don't want to see my frat stuff in the back, but shout out to Phi Beta Sigma. Um, we're a community service based organization, so that's what we did, and it's just a part of me that will never go away.
I appreciate that, man. And I think it's great to hear because I think a lot of times, unfortunately, in the media, and at least in the public eye, people think of those who provide housing, landlords, as folks who aren't really contributing or adding much to society. And there's probably a small number of people who have earned that reputation, but the vast majority of folks are looking to provide quality housing. And yes, they want to make money and be profitable, but they also want to provide quality housing, something that they can be proud of, something they can show other people, and ultimately provide the kind of housing that people want to live in. So I appreciate you kind of keeping that top of mind for you and the service and having that society impact be a major part of your company. For folks that want to learn more about you or your firm, they can check out Winston ENG. Excuse me, I'll say that again. They can check out WinstonENG.com, short for Winston Engineering. So WinstonENG.com. Right now, we're going to go to our round of insights. Are you ready?
Let's go.
They say you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So if you want to grow as a multifamily investor, you have to spend more time with other multifamily investors. And an easy way to do that is to join our apartment investing mastermind group today. Just go to casmancapital.com and click on the mastermind button. Now, as a part of this group, you'll get access to expert trainings, group coaching calls, industry news and updates, as well as all of our webinars and workshops, including our 3-hour workshop on raising capital. Again, if you want to be around other multifamily investors that can help you scale your portfolio today and grow your network, make sure you're a part of the Apartment Investing Mastermind. Just go to casmancapital.com and click on the mastermind button today. All right, Anthony, give me a failure or an apparent failure that sets you up for later success.
I thought I was going to build the next top golf development in Southern California. Then COVID hit and completely destroyed the project. Funds dried up. But through that process, I went through the fire with creating appropriate business plans, being able to formulate the right team so that you can get investors. And I think that's going to be helpful for some future business ventures that I'd like to go into.
Right. So we can pause and cut this out if necessary, or I will keep it in if it's okay. My editor will fix all this. Was that the basketball one?
No, Top Golf. So it's no.
Oh, it wasn't Top Golf. It was Top Golf.
Right. It was similar
we
to
said
Top
the next
Golf.
Top Golf. I thought you meant like, so there's, I don't know if you saw this, but they're basically trying to create a basketball version of Top Golf. And I didn't know if it was just a concept. I just saw something on Instagram like a while back, but I didn't know if it was just a concept or if like this was actually in motion or if it got, canceled or whatever. But all right.
That sounds intriguing, but no, it was a small competitor that I was trying to franchise the technology, but it failed.
Got it. Okay, got it. All right. Give me a mobile or digital resource you recommend for your business.
So we heavily use Monday.com. It's a project management tool. I think they got me on one of the ads on YouTube, and we were using spreadsheets to track projects, but we're probably at 600 clients, over 1,000 projects. Spreadsheets aren't going to cut it. So it keeps us organized. It automatically alerts our engineers when a due date is coming. So at a given notice, I can tell you exactly what our lead times are.
Give me the book you've recommended or gifted the most in the last year.
I'll tell you the last one a few that I just finished. I do a lot of audiobooks. One is, what is it called? Actually, I got it right here. It's called King Leopold's Ghost. And it talks about King Leopold of Belgium back in the late 1800s and how he colonized parts of the Congo. And it gives you some serious insight into the colonizer's mindset. And it kind of helps you understand the world a bit more kind of on a global scale. And I just finished Young Jeezy's new book about his life. And it's interesting to get into the mind of hustling from that perspective leading into music, because a lot of those components can lead into any kind of business to make you successful.
No, I appreciate that. Those seem like two vastly different books, the way you describe them, but we'll have to check those out. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Give me a daily habit that helps you stay focused on your goals.
Every day before I leave my office, I have a whiteboard up here, and it's called the Plan of the Day. I always write what I have to do for the next day, so that immediately when I walk into my office, before I go into emails, I look at the plan of the day and say, hey, let's knock out those key items. Because as a business leader, it's easy to get kind of in the weeds, where you need to focus on kind of top level things that are going to progress your company's why. And then I do my best to stay in shape. So that provides a lot of clarity for me, and kind of gets rid of the jitteriness of sitting at a desk for hours on end.
Give me your number one insight for managing projects.
Set clear expectations, especially when it comes to your team. Making sure that people not only have a clear goal, but they have clear timelines. As soon as possible is not a timeline, right? Tomorrow by 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time is a timeline. So I found a lot of success with that.
All right, let's lighten the mood. I know your company is based in California, but you are physically in Nova Scotia, so I'll let you pick. Give me your favorite place to grab a bite to eat.
In Nova Scotia, so the food options aren't as plentiful as I was used to in Southern California, and we love Mexican food, which is a bit harder to find. There's a place out here called Bar Sophia that's in downtown Halifax. That's amazing. And I'm vegetarian, so being able to get vegetarian food that tastes really, really good, that's high up on my list.
All right, man. We'll put that one on the show in the show notes there. I've never been to Nova Scotia, so I'll ask you off camera if it's a place I should be booking a trip to. But I want to thank you, man, for coming on the show today and giving us a great interview. Giving us great insight on the development process. MEP for folks who aren't familiar, the mechanical, the electrical, and the plumbing aspect of design, of new construction, of renovation, and just how important it is to bring these individuals up front so you understand what's needed, what the time frame needs to be, what your budget's going to be, what materials are you going to use, and just to allow you to take more control over your project. Again, I want to thank you for all that information. If anyone wants to learn more about you or your company, they can go to winstoneng.com. That's Winston Engineering, so winstoneng.com, and learn more there. Anthony, I just want to thank you again for being a great guest and coming on Multifamily Insights. We look forward to staying in touch with you, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me.